Alrighty, hello and welcome to the CREEDCAST for 2025. The season is coming up quick, a little bit too quick for my liking, although more so just because it feels like I'm supremely unorganized for the season to come, though I'm very excited for it. We were actually going to be coming back for our first official episode of the year and then going weekly from next week, but we've bumped up to having an episode this week as well because obviously some big news in Port Adelaide Clubland on the men's side over the last week with well, first of all, the rumor, speculation, whatever you want to call it, that came from, I think, Matt Turner, which is an advertiser journalist, that Port Adelaide were looking to announce a succession plan, is the popular term for it, for Ken Hinkley to finish up at the end of the year and Josh Carr to come into the job from 2026. That was sort of this time last week, and of course, yesterday we had it officially confirmed from Port Adelaide channels that Ken Hinkley will be finishing up after this year with Josh Carr, obviously former champion player of ours, premiership player, a beloved figure at Port Adelaide, both for on-field and off-field reasons. Well, I'm sure we'll touch on that later on when we just chat about him. But he will be on a 3-year contract from this next year or the end of this year, I guess, once they start preparing for 2026. So that's the news. Ken Hinkley, after 13 years at the end of this year. It's a weird thing to talk about, though, because we're talking about him finishing, but it is actually a long way away from where we are now here recording on Thursday night, the 13th of February. He still does have a full season to coach. But before we get into all that, my co-host Jamie is back, 2025. Really excited to get into it with you, Jamie. And first of all, how you been? How's the off season been? It's been probably we've chatted, but it's been a month and a half since the people have heard from you. So how you been?
Hello, everyone. Happy 2025. And hello to you, Dave. Yeah, been busy, as
You
you're well
have.
aware. I've been very, very busy. Apparently, buying a home over the Christmas and New Year period is a pretty stressful time. But yeah, no, Lucy and myself, yeah, bought our first home. So we've had a bit on our plate, but it's been exciting. And look, you mentioned you were ready for the football season. Like, I'm obviously keen, but it's been such a good summer of cricket. And as the listeners and watchers, viewers obviously know, I'm a cricket tragic. Yeah, I don't know. If now that the Sri Lanka series is more or less finished, yeah, the wheels are starting to turn. Obviously, there's more football on the radio, discussion that is. But yeah, I've been good. The news this week has been interesting.
Mm.
But yeah, we'll get into that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really, really happy for you guys and the family for getting it all sorted. I will say from the football standpoint, for me, like if I want go on to put my coaching hat on, like buying the house and doing all that in the off season would be perfect. Like all coaches would be like, "Man, you're a team player." Like it's kind of like the
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
make sure you're not having a baby in September or all
Having
that kind of
kids,
stuff.
getting
Yeah,
married.
yeah.
Yeah.
Time it all for the off season. So you've done well because you're set up in the new house to start recording the podcast again this year. So
That's exactly right.
well done,
Yeah.
team player. Uh,
You're welcome,
um,
everyone.
yeah,
Happy to be here.
yeah. He did it all just for the Creecast, by the way.
Well, yeah. It was an added benefit, I must
Yeah,
admit.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so massive news, obviously. You and I, and again, the housekeeping is that we will get into preview and what our plans were from next week, and be back weekly, all things going well from then on. But yeah, the news in the off season, off season this week about the Ken Hinkley, uh, the succession plan to Josh Carr. It seems like a badly kept secret though for the last couple of years because we've kind of heard about it. Caroline Wilson talked about it a year and a half ago when the last extension got announced, it was talked about then, and Josh Carr taking himself out of the Richmond coaching search a year and a half ago as well. There was all this stuff that was there, but it still feels weird to be here now that it's official and that Port Adelaide have gone down the route of the succession plan, which has its benefact detractors out there, and there's good and bad examples of it. We'll get into that a little bit later about how we feel about it, but just what was your initial reaction, I guess, to the tweet last week from Matt Turner, which just had the air of this that felt real. So as soon as I saw it, I was like,
Yeah.
"That's real." And then I was just waiting for it and expecting it. I think I texted you a few days ago saying, let's be ready to maybe do a podcast whenever this is. I didn't want to do one just on speculation. I wanted to do it once news was officially announced. So yeah, your reaction to that, and then your reaction yesterday morning. It was yesterday morning, was it? It wasn't. Yeah, when we
Yes. Yeah.
became the hottest city in the world in Adelaide with our sweltering heat for a day. Um,
Oh man.
so as we're sitting there sweltering through that, and you're, kind of distilling the news, how was your reaction to it all?
Look, if you didn't mention it, I was going to mention it, and it was just a bit of like, yeah, the world's worst kept secret has
Hmm.
now come to fruition. So yeah, not surprised. I was more or less happy that it's not an annoying point of discussion that's going to linger throughout the season. Obviously, there's now a different type of discussion about yeah, various ways you can look at the situation this season. But yeah, comfortable, unsurprised, but happy,
Hmm.
content. I'm obviously one to look on the more positive side of things and life
Hmm.
generally. And look, I look at our club and I don't see a lot wrong with it, to be honest. And now it just gives us for the people who actually love and respect the club, um, including Ken and to a lesser extent Josh. Obviously, we've got the next, hopefully decade with him as a
Hmm.
successful coach, so we can kind of worry ourselves about him later. But Ken and the club, like, it gives us a season to kind of enjoy it, send him off, hopefully in the right way or as the best way as we can, and appreciate objectively what he has brought to the club, and objectively look over his era at the club, and subjectively, of course, as well. There'll be a lot of subjective opinion being thrown about this season, but like I said, I prefer to look more on the positive side of things, and I'll probably get into the depth of that a bit more as we go along. But yeah, that's a season of trepidation, as we'll get into next week. But now there's a layer of enjoyment as long as the season goes in a general direction that we expect.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of opinions already flying about what this all means now for the season. Some things have been said in some podcasts. Like Kosh has had some comments about some of those comments about what will happen if the season starts badly and whatnot. But we can get into that. Um, I guess probably the best way to start, I think, is the press conference from yesterday because that kind of branches out from a lot of our thoughts. I think that we've got. Kosh, obviously, is the press conference yesterday was David Kosh, flanked by Ken on one side, Josh on the other. And Kosh spoke first, kind of just standard run of the mill professional speak. He did. There's one faux pas he made that I always like. It's one of those little bugbears I have about Kosh is like he makes little mistakes in some of his speakings on the club that he, with his media training and how professionally generally is, needs to not because that's the things that people pick up on and it is because he kind of said we've been finished top four for the past 5 years and I listened back a couple of times to make sure I didn't mishear him but I think he meant to say 4 of the past 5 years but he just said
Yeah,
we've qualified top four for the past 5 years and obviously there was one year in there that started quite horribly and we weren't able to make up the ground so just one of those little things that I picked up on just because it's I knew that that wasn't the record, and yeah, it's just one of those things that I liked. I don't like it. It's just I pick up on it because it's just like he was reading from a written statement. So if that's actually what he wrote, then he hasn't quite put the time and effort into these research there, which is one of those things that fans will like the more militant side of the fans that do like to pick up on everything.
overanalyze
Yeah,
comments
that and
made.
they'll go, that's why we don't like him. And I'm like, that's why he need and because there's a lot of things that Kosh has done well. There's things that I criticize him for. Those are the reasons that he will get people go at him and say, oh, he's not, nutting out the details enough to pick up on those things. So, um, Yeah, but apart from that, it was Kosh. Kosh was pretty professional in that kind of opening statement, just that opening up and telling the people essentially what was happening. What the really interesting part of the press conference for me was when it got to Ken, because it's typical Ken, emotionality throughout it, a little bit of humor, a lot of fire there still. I thought was the first thing. A lot of fire there. The mention of the premiership and the dream and what he's always dreamed of came up multiple times. It wasn't a
Hmm.
it was a man both with a lot of fire still and maybe a little bit of weight off his shoulders, I think, as well. It was a I
Yeah.
found it a really interesting demeanor that Ken had there. It was nothing unfamiliar, but there was a little change to it, and I thought that was really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree. And I've said it on here before, like I genuinely believe that Ken has been in it for the right reasons all throughout his tenure.
Mm,
I don't buy into any of the accusations that are made against him about him dragging the club along and taking it for a ride just to get a job or just for a paycheck. Well, I've never believed that for a second. Um, we're a club that gave him a chance, and um, with what he's had at his disposal, uh, I think he's done a pretty fucking good job in a way that I think he has been fully invested, is the point I was making. So from his speech, again, it was like you said, it was heartfelt, it was emotional. It did seem like a bit of a relief in a way.
mm,
And again, I'm hoping that helps us enjoy this season a little bit more, because hopefully we have a good one for him to send him off. But yeah, I might be biased, but I don't think I am. I think that the large majority of people, both within our club or our club's fan base, and then even the broader AFL community, I believe that Ken has given it his all
mm,
every single year that he's been in charge. And from that point of view, he has given me nothing to believe that he'll do this year any differently. What if we lose the first five? You mentioned 2022, but like we hear that every year,
mm.
basically. So whether Ken's in his last year or not, Akosh kind of alluded to that too. Like we always seem to be written off or mentioned as one of the sliders in the pack, and we continually prove them wrong under Ken in some way or another, or more often than not, I should say. So yeah, the positivity, I wouldn't have expected it to change. If anything, it probably increased because now Josh can get to work, Ken can get to work and contribute to their combined goal that they've had the whole way through. I mean, Josh Carr started as a coach under Ken, left obviously, and has come back. Like, yeah, 100% believe that Ken is invested in this year, and yeah, is as desperate as ever to finish his career here as a coach with the flag that has eluded him on
Mm.
several occasions.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's he's a man that's quite proud of his own work ethic, I think, and whatever people believe of what that is, he does pour his heart and soul into. We've seen examples of that over the years as well, particularly last year, whether it be the emotional response after the close win over St Kilda or the different style of emotional response to the win over Hawthorn in the semi-final. He had responses that as a human um, that gets passionate about whether it be sports or other things in life. I
Mm.
understand impassioned responses to things. Those don't. If you're apathetic to something or don't care about something, you simply you cannot fake that authenticity of response
No, yeah, I
to
agree.
a heightened situation like a win over that St Kilda win or the Hawthorn win. Um, yeah, just still angry about it. But thinking about the Merseyside derby this morning, like the Liverpool play, the
Cheap
Curtis.
slot.
Yeah, well, it was Curtis Jones, like the Liverpool player who's from Liverpool, when he saw the Everton player giving
Yeah.
it to the fans, and he immediately ran over with like he saw red and went. You can't, you don't fake that, and you don't fake whether it be the tearful response to the St Kilda win or the little bit of back and forth with Jack Ginnivan and then James Sicily. Like you just don't fake that. That comes from a place of there's a passion within you. You've achieved something in that.
Hmm.
That's just a small achievement. It's just a win in a final or a win in a regular and a minor round game. But you can't that emotional response that comes from that just can't be faked. And that also the harder you work at something, the more when that work gets a tangible achievement, which is, a win every week when you train and turn up and go and make your aim to beat whoever's in front of you that week. When you get a achievement out of that and a tangible response, and you put all that hard work in, that's when that emotional response comes out. So, yeah, as that's a long-winded way of saying I agree. It's just there's been those detractors out there that have said he's taken the club for a ride and he's just getting a paycheck. It's a lot easier ways for a guy with his developmental talents to get that paycheck with those skills without the head coach stress. He alluded to that in the press conference as well. He said this is a hard job. A lot of people don't understand what goes into it. So I like
Hmm.
that you tell that there's a fight. I was a lot more confident. Well, and we'll talk about our belief on where the season might go next week when we do a preview, but that's a separate thing. I was a lot more confident in my belief that he still has the fire once I watched that press conference because you could just see there was that little bit of combativeness to him, even when it came
Hmm.
up. Um, Even when it came up, Kane Corns, his little shirtless walk and talk, which Kane Corns looks like a fucking Avenger when he's framing it like that. Geez, he's ripped. But it came
Yeah.
up. One of the journalists brought up about, is this someone out there has said that this is you guys saying you're not going to win. Hoshi just threw his head back and started chuckling. Like you could tell he was annoyed by it. And then Ken was like, "Who said?" And then it was like, "Oh, it's Kane." Like it was like, Kane and me are mates, but this is. I think
Yeah.
he even referred to it as uneducated opinion. um,
We've spoken about these bombs from Kane in relation to Port Adelaide before. I don't
yeah,
believe like it's a get out of jail free card
exactly.
or
Yeah, you have had this.
it's in that realm.
Yeah,
He did it last year. He said, or yeah, or was it the year before?
You have talked about it recently, and it might
Yeah,
have been, yeah, you've talked about it on somewhere with me, or I don't know if it was on pod or
yeah.
off, but you have talked about this idea you have, like, and it is with validity that Kane, and Kane is a very educated media performer now. He obviously does come from a very successful AFL player background, so he does have that
And
gravity.
media
Yeah, and
to an
media now.
extent as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but
With
yeah.
his dad setting the groundwork.
Exactly. So yeah, it was just interesting to see, and because we all know, because everyone, it's another fan thing that why fans go at Kane Corn so much is they're like um, you know, I can't. I'm trying to think of a way to say what people say online about Kane Corns and Hinkley, and none of it is very friendly. So I'm just going to say like Kane. They say he's friendly to Ken, so it was interesting to see that little, but it
Yeah,
was
yeah, like backs him up.
yeah, but it was good to see that combativeness from Ken. Ken responded to it like a coach, like the coach he's been in the last 13 years now. So that made me feel better about the season going forward and this idea of the succession plan for this year. The proof is only going to be in the pudding as we go forward. But as far as what I saw in the
Absolutely.
press conference and how Ken responded to some of those questions, you could see he was still in coach mode. Like he hasn't started his holiday
No.
yet. And he said all that stuff, but the way he talked and his body language and his responses made me feel confident that it's not all just talk. He genuinely is still pretty um, invested in the mission for 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. I I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. There's nothing more that yeah could really change my mind.
Mm. Thought it was a very telling thing about how connected he is with the group as well. He mentioned that he had to get Richo to
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
tell the Richo Matthew Richardson, our CEO, did the official notice to the playing group about the decision going forward because Ken said that he wouldn't be able to get through it. again, I thought that was very telling about where his head's at and how invested he is because he said that the hardest thing about this decision is saying it out loud. Like he's accepted the decision and he's quite happy with it, but he was also just like saying how it is still, it makes it more real when you say it. And then obviously a playing group that he's famously quite connected with, it was again his heart was on his sleeve in that moment. I thought that was again another sign to that connection, and um, that is going to be an interesting thing going forward. How that coach player,
He's
because
got unfinished business.
yeah,
Like he's,
yeah,
they said, someone in that frame of mind who has that form of passion, if you're not reaching the ultimate goal that you set out to achieve, then yeah, every new opportunity feels like unfinished business. And yeah, look, we guested on Eddie Corns' podcast not that long ago, and
mhm,
we were talking about what we thought for the season. And I mentioned that I don't see a premiership list, and I expect him to unfortunately just be a bit of a heartbreak story in a Port Adelaide AFL era sense. But you know, he, he has unfinished business, and it would be unfortunate if that prediction comes true. It's easy to say, it's one of the easiest things to say in football is that this team won't win the premiership. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, whether we are likely to or not, yeah, it's just going to forever feel like unfinished business to Ken because, like you said, he's as invested in the players as what they have professed to be with him.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and that's what I'd be interested to see how the players are responding to it. I'm sure, but to be fair, I think a lot of players probably were. Yeah, I mean, would have seen rumors, the same rumors we saw last week, and
I think
um,
they would have been kept in the loop most
yeah,
of the way through, to be
exactly.
honest.
Particularly some of
Particularly
the
the
more
leaders.
the leaders. Yeah, yeah. But you know, it's there is always there's a lot of those players have stuck around. In my opinion, I mean, people can have their opinions, but we have had kept together a pretty good core of players. Partly with Ken being such a good leader of a group, not just a leader of men, but he's a great leader of a group of men. There hasn't been, I mean, as far as and I don't talk to too many former players, but I am friends with at least one former player that I do consider a friend, and I've asked him about. I won't mention who on the air, but like, it's a but I asked him once, and he said, "No, Ken's a great bloke." Like each, yeah. So, um, there is like I haven't heard much, you know, and any player that probably would come out. I don't know. Even players that have left and stuff seem to have a pretty good relationship with him. As far as you know, there might be the occasional one that's had a butting of heads, and a lot of people bring up the Wingard trade as one of them. But those kind of situations are fairly few and far
Mm,
between. Um,
yeah,
I know Charlie Dixon talked about that when he signed his contract to come down here, and he came down here. It was cold, and he thought at first he was thinking he was going to see out his contract and head
two
straight back
years. Yeah.
up to Queensland, and now he's got land down here and playing for Lobethal in the local footy league this year. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I do believe there is again. We can talk about, and I think we'll, you know, throughout the year things will come up with criticisms to Ken, and there's certainly validity to certain criticisms at times as well, but. I think there's a lot of things that just get said out of frustration about who he is as a person, and I think the proof is in the fact that we've had a pretty consistent playing list over the years. Nothing's blown up, nothing's fallen apart. Yes, we haven't gotten to the heights, but we haven't gone to the low lows either. And again, there's the criticism within that as to how do you get to that extra level. But a lot of great players that have been beloved at our club and are still beloved, whether it be former players that we love or ones that are still there. And you know, Travis Boak's the shining example of that. Um, you know, they're still there and they're still seem pretty happy to be playing for Ken. So if you think of Ken as the devil, but you love Travis Boak, then there's a bit of cognitive dissonance in there because there's a lot of players there
Yeah, a
that
little bit.
have a fairly
Mm.
good relationship with him still, I think. So, um, moving on to just
Well, in that, just
oh yeah,
sorry to
no,
cut in,
no,
but in
no, no,
that
go for it.
regard, it seems like anyone who says anything positive to Ken is just some sort of fucking lemming.
Yeah.
And they've been, you know, sucked up into some sort of vortex. Again, detractors of Ken Hinckley always go on about like his mates in the footy industry backing him up all the time. But whether that's true or not, there's a core reason, and that's because he's a genuinely good person.
Hmm.
Therefore, in the industry that he works in, both the players and the football club that he works in love him, and a lot of other people in the industry love him. And the majority of people want to see good people do well.
Hmm.
That's probably why there are a lot of people who have his back. Um, in saying that, I don't think he's not retained his. I don't think he's retained his position not on merit. Like yeah, he's a fantastic person, and I don't think that. Yeah, I could go over several points that I've already made tonight, but just what you said before, it just made me think about good people doing well and others wanting good people to do well, and kind of like, if you're sticking up for the good person just because you don't like them, then they mustn't be like they must be the enemy all of a sudden. Like
Yeah.
even with Travis Boak, because he has continuously had Ken's back. And then you're like, oh well, I like Travis Boak, but oh no, but Travis Boak, and even with Josh Carr, like the apprehension after the excitement that some people had turned to apprehension after we lost a handful of games each season that he's been back. It's like, no, Josh isn't the answer because
Mm.
we lost one game in the season really badly, and then a handful of other games around that total last year, the year before. So he mustn't be the answer. And I mean, he's been sucked into Ken's, sinister vortex. It's just a bit of bullshit. I
It was
think
it
at the end of the
was
day, it's because he's a good person, a
mm,
good colleague, and a good leader.
yeah. Yeah, it was that 13 game win streak we went on where it was just like, oh, it's Josh Carr, he's in the box now
He's the
and
one coaching. Yeah.
but then when we lo when we lost those couple of games in that year, it was just like, oh no, Josh Carr's lost the touch, and then when it started being talking about succession plans, when Caroline Wilson came out with her stuff a year and a half ago or whatever about handshake agreements, and yeah, maybe there's validity to, and clearly there's probably some validity to all that we, and a lot of us were probably fairly cognizant of it as well. But yeah, I was just like, oh, I'm not sure Josh Carr's the answer because he's in the system too much, and he's infected by this idea of this toxicity at Alberton. It's just like, no, we're actually just a
It's
what?
insidious.
Yeah,
That's
we're
a word that I've seen. Yeah.
like I get like, and this is the thing. Like, I don't want to sound like we're just bashing the critics out there because I've always said that a lot of the harshest critics and some of the ones that do go too far in their verbiage about how they criticize Ken and the club, a lot of the time underneath their Ken's a fraud and Kosh is a piece of shit and all that stuff. Sometimes between like there'll be three or four tweets like that, but then there'll be one that actually has some valid criticism about something the club's doing. And I'm like, that's a great point. Just leave it at that. Like, don't do all the other
Yeah.
excessive stuff because that's what gets your message actually muddled. Like you can, and it is like firing off tweets to just get rid of frustration. I get it. I used to tweet a lot worse than I do, and I still occasionally will. Just usually about certain political leaders around the world. But I've kind of learnt to just try to just to be a bit calmer about some things how I express opinion because I understand it is, and it's why I sometimes like I do just write out tweets and leave them in drafts because that's a good. It's journaling really, and people just unfortunately have taken Twitter as a journal now, rather than actually writing a private journal and just getting your thoughts out, because that's why journaling is a good thing because you write your
That's
thoughts
why it's
out and it's
recommended.
like
Yeah.
it gets it out there. But some people just do it on Twitter and unfortunately say that, yeah, but there is validity. There's a lot of valid criticism out there about how things have been handled with the club and whether it be Ken's contracts and stuff and whether or not you like I can have my criticism about whether or not the extension in 2023 is the right thing to do. But then, as you've said a few times as well, and I agree, it was a rock and a hard place. It was like I do think that the club should have held fast, but then I can understand Ken's apprehension maybe and the club. And it's just like it is just there's no right answer. There's maybe answers you'd prefer, depending on what side of the and how much down the rabbit hole of extreme hate you have for all those things.
Mhm.
But um, yeah, that's getting down away from it a little bit. Um, Josh Carr had his moment in the press conference, which was great. If you have anything else to add, by the way, go for it. But we'll get back to some of the general stuff after. I just wanted to touch on Josh Carr's press conference. I thought it was he speaks well. He's he's
It's
I'm
important.
looking forward to him as coach because he does have a real dry sense of humor and um I put out when before I'd even watched the press conference, I put out a little post on Instagram about just him being the next head coach. I've got a Josh Carr signed card around here from 20 years ago that I put up there and just put up a couple of clips, including his great goal in the that opened up our 2004 Premiership win. Iconic moment.
Yes.
Like it's great that he's as a player, he's got some iconic moments.
Yeah.
Within that game, he's both taken the full force of a Jonathan Brown right hook and kicked the opening goal in the grand final. Like he's um
He
and he
slipped a
also,
tackle to kick it too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, it was a real classy move, classy finish, like classy gather, slips a tackle and a classy finish from like just what 45 out. Um, I always found his celebration fascinating because he's like fist pumping, and he's turning around like, wait, did it go through? Like, I don't, the crowd, the Port fans behind the goals are going crazy. But he's kind of looking like, wait, did it?
Of
I don't know.
course.
But he even had a moment in the press conference where they asked him about um, if he's talked to other coaches that have gone through this, like Simon Goodwin, Nathan Buckley. He's like, yeah,
Yes,
and
yes.
he says, "Oh, I haven't talked to him, but if I run into him, maybe we'll have a chat about it." And he kind of just pauses for a second and goes, "If they want to chat, they may not want to chat to me after my playing career." And it was always the
Yeah.
thing that the it came out from multiple clubs during his career that the one player on Port side that just doesn't shut up from whistle to whistle is Josh Carr. It's actually quite amazing that he's now in the head coaching spot. But how did you feel about him just overall at the press conference? I thought it was more professional. It was like he was more restrained, obviously, than Ken, who's a seasoned, but he certainly let his a little bit of his personality out as well, I think.
Yeah, I think if you listened to enough sports radio, like when he was coach of North Adelaide and then even his various stints as assistant coach of Port Adelaide, like you would have already consumed a bit of media where he has done his own press conferences and whatnot. The real tests will come from that point of view when he is in the big chair. He's still at the end of the day just an assistant coach, so he doesn't really have to answer to much.
Mhm.
But yeah, I've always thought he spoke fairly well for himself, and yeah, being a senior coach, it is somewhat important these days more than ever. And yeah, don't think he let himself down. I'm pretty sure, he was fairly concise, straight to the point, but fairly open to questions and just the situation in itself.
Yeah, even just the way he and Ken spoke about their kind of relationship and how they're going to hand both in how they handled the talk about the fact that this is actually happening, and he kind of Josh just said, "Look, we just checked in with each other and asked how we're doing with about it." Very human response. Like it wasn't. There was no like I'm going to tell the media what like that we sat down and he just said, "Oh, I think we were having coffee or something," and we asked each other how we're doing, and it was like good like a good connection with the kind of empathetic thing that you want to see out of a coach. Um, he did. People asked about that. He was asked about how because again we touched on it what 10 minutes ago or whatever about Ken's connection with his players, and he was asked that question, which is a tough one for him to answer because he doesn't want to say I'm going to do exactly what Ken's going to do but he did say, look, I've been learning and Kosh alluded to it very well in the press conference as well, and that Port is a club that actually does the only one that has a coaching development coach.
Yeah, and
And
I
that,
didn't
and
know
I
that.
wasn't aware of
That
that
was good
either.
insight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that Port do behind the scenes that, again, that you've alluded to over the years, and I have as well, that we're actually a well-built club on the outside. It's just, it's getting the on-field result is the ultimate thing, but we do a lot of things right around the periphery to try to set people up for the best possible opportunity.
I
And
100% agree.
yeah, and Josh has been in that system, and yeah, he said, look, I'm gonna, learn from Ken, but I take things from different places, and I'm gonna make it my whatever my philosophy for coaching is going to be. But Josh is going to be smart enough to know that whatever the modern coach needs to do to connect with players, he's got to do. And he's, 13. I think he's 14 years younger than they touched on it, that he's getting close to about the age that Ken was when he took over at Port. So it's kind of,
That's wild. That was
yeah,
wild to me when they said that. I was like, fuck, I feel old.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Me sitting here at
As I'm sure he would too, with
yeah.
hearing that, both of them.
Yeah, yeah, it's even wild. Just today when I was Googling a few things about Ken, just to get some refresh my mind about a few just little details, and seeing pictures of him come up when he did take over a Port, and it does show the passage of time. Yeah, sometimes not kind to coaches. They did touch on it. It's like they said, "Oh, Josh, you're going to get a few more grey hairs by the end of it." And he kind of said, "Well, if I'm here in 13 years, then hopefully it's been a pretty good ride." But
Exactly. My thoughts exactly too.
yeah, but yeah, I thought it was he touched on kind of his how he wanted to develop as a coach as well. I thought it was really interesting when he said that he did want to spend some time, like when he came back into the AFL system, he actually wanted to go somewhere else before he. Seems like he always dreamed of coaching Port. He mentioned that. He said when
He
I,
said that, yeah.
yeah, but the
And
fact that
that's
he,
like, oh, like
oh,
again, for the people on the positive side of things, like that's just like that's the shit right there. When you love your club, and then a guy like this, a hero of the club, is yeah, gets
when
to
a
fulfill his
hero
dream. Like,
comes
how can you not
along,
get behind that?
yeah. I felt yeah when you're doing this, it's like it was just like in Moneyball when they clinch the trade and Jonah Hill just does the fist just closed. Yes, yeah. When he's just like, it was my dream to
Yeah,
coach this club. I'm just like, yes. But the fact he
yeah.
went away, he's had his journey. He
Yes,
he obviously, I mean, he was coach with us in the early mid 2010s. There's a great video on the Port Adelaide socials from like probably 10 years ago of when he was a coach and he participated in the return of Gavin Wanganeen's premiership Guernsey to him. Like he was the coach that went out.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't seen it?
I would have watched it a long time
Oh, it's
ago.
great.
Yeah.
I'll send. It's just such a great because Josh Carr's the one that goes and meets a random person that doesn't get videoed in the stands of I think Marvel or something like that, who hands the Guernsey back. I don't know if that was the person. Like somehow it's ended up in this person's possession. I think they had no questions asked thing with it. They were just like, we just want it back, and then they present it to Gavin. They bring Gavin in for something like a story, like concoct a story for the reason that they get him in. And but yeah,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
Josh that was the assistant coach that when he collected the Guernsey from the whoever it was that returned it. So he was involved then. He goes away, coaches North Adelaide to a premiership, has some lean seasons at North Adelaide as well, but he has head coaching experience at the I guess you could semi-professional level, you could call it. And then he comes
Well,
back.
and he won a premiership with our now captain in his team.
Yes, yes.
Well, and Jordan Sweet, I believe, was in and around North Adelaide around that
Okay.
time too.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, yeah,
Some nice, it's a
he's
nice
done
little
it the right way.
nice little parallels that are coming together here. Hopefully there's
Mm.
another connection there. And then, but yeah, he goes over to Freo for a couple of years after the North Adelaide pretty much through the COVID years before he comes back to Port in 2023 as and now is entering his third season, fourth season now. Yeah, 23, 24, 25. Yeah, so yeah, no, this is his third season as an assistant coach, and then yeah, just doing it. It's 10:15. Don't blame me for bad math. Brain is struggling to brain, but yeah, it's
Well, I checked out. I was like, I don't want to do that right now, so I just left it in your hand.
yeah, you're Rose on the door saying, "Jack, I got no room up here for you." Like you're on your own.
Yeah.
Um,
Shit, man.
But yeah, I mean, he's had a great playing career and has a fair bit of coaching experience up his sleeve between. And he's like I was really and it makes me more like he's not just someone who's just craving the head coaching, like he wants it, but he's done the time. He's had a plan
He
to
wants
get.
to feel ready for it.
Yeah, and he made himself a plan to get there. Like the fact he says he wanted to be the coach of Port Adelaide, but took himself out of Port Adelaide for a few years in two different ways, both at head coaching at a lower level and then assistant coaching at another club to get a bit of different experience. Another club that he's had a successful run playing for. His time at Freo, he was vice captain for a couple of years, best on ground in a derby at one point. And the reason he came back to Port was once his brother retired at Freo, he wanted to come back and
Well,
yeah.
and yeah, and he mentioned his love for the club then too. I remember it in one of his
Mm.
press conferences after he came back. Like,
The
I was the
reason
coach.
number nine as a favorite Guernsey number of mine, it's not wrong. It's from Josh Carr back. Like Josh Carr was one of my favorites. I will admit to being having a seat on the boundary when he came back with Freo in 2005. I did boo him. I was 17. I was a dickhead. Like I'll admit to that. I did boo him because I was a dickhead and I was hurt. I love Josh Carr. Josh Carr was probably one of my
Yeah.
in my Mount Rushmore favorite players as a teen. So, and he didn't deserve that, but I was 17. I thought that's what you did.
It's what you do
Yeah,
generally.
yeah, yeah. But and I wasn't like loud boy. I was just kind of like he went bars at one point. I just probably went just boo, like yeah. But his we should touch on it just for a minute, just his kind of cultural cult status. It's not even cult, like he's a very, very good player. He's a Rising Star nominee. He was a Peter Badco, the first Peter Badco medal to be awarded in 2004 was to him, which is of course the Anzac medal for
Yeah.
those that aren't aware of the name of it. He Before we get to the off-field showdown stuff, just the on-field showdown record of 10-0 in showdowns is like I haven't looked it up, so I don't know
It's
if there is
iconic.
someone else, but I don't think it's possible for another player on either side of the divide to have played double-digit showdowns and not have lost one. Like I just don't think it's possible, just with the way they break down over the years. For him to
Yeah,
just have
absolutely.
that,
Well, when
like
you consider that the biggest streak is like what, 7 or 8 games,
which was us in that early 2000s
early
period.
2000s. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the way his career in two parts as a player landed, yeah, just timed it perfectly.
Yeah, but I mean, 2009, 10, oh 08, oh 09, oh 09, 10 when he came back, we weren't that great then. He just the one,
No,
and I was at his because he retired after a showdown in 2010 and
yeah,
mid-year 2010 he announced his retirement, played in the showdown, and a great image of him holding the trophy up one more time, and yeah, so just an iconic record that will be unlikely to be matched. I mean, you never say never with any records. Um, but it's very difficult with how Showdown history has gone for the last 30 odd years, almost 30 years, for a player to
yeah.
play that many and not lose. So a great record there. And obviously the iconic Ramsgate incident that he was a part of. And yeah, I mean, it's not that we're glorifying, punch-ons at the pub because it's not good, but the fact that showdown rivalry the word is, I mean, I think I was reading an article that Kane Corns has talked about this night that part of the frustration was from the Crows end that they were on the end of, I think at that point it was 4 or 5 in a row that Port had won by 2002, I think that happened. The Crows were frustrated at the fact that Port had won once again in a tightly contested showdown, and yeah, Josh Carr got lippy with Mark Rashudo, and then depending on who Mark Rashudo will tell you he tossed Josh Carr across the bonnet of a car. Yeah, Josh Carr's said, oh, we exchanged some words, and then it went a bit further than that. Like it's
I
uh,
don't know if I'd actually seen that interview. It would have got door stopped or something, I'm sure. But I loved I loved it how he was explaining it, where mentioning Port Adelaide being a proud club that's been around for a long time, and then they've been around for a few hours. So he gave them a bit of advice as I spit on the enjoyment.
Just
Yeah,
salivating so
yeah.
much at this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I was just like, that's the best clip like ever.
yeah,
Um, so the Crows have been around for a few hours, so yeah, just took him outside to give him some advice or something like that. Yeah, it's just great.
yeah. One of I mean, some of the words that I've seen that they hung out a little bit in the Ramsgate and the Crows boys left, came back after a few more drinks and got a bit more lippy, and then Rashudo asked Carr to join him outside, and yeah, Carr went out to give him his advice, I guess. I mean, even better, I
Yeah,
think
male bravado
yeah.
in times gone by.
But what I think
Yeah.
that speaks to is that you've got a guy coming in that's not gonna the things that Ken's been accused of, whether it be just collecting a pay, like Cars, he's Port Adelaide, like he's literally put his body on the line both on the field and off the field. Like
Yeah, yeah.
he apparently turned off his phone and just kept and stayed out until 5 o'clock that night too, because he was like, well, I'm in trouble already, so I might as well enjoy my night. um, so he doesn't do things half-assed. Like he's yeah, and clearly his coaching career has been long now, and he's been a sought after assistant and took himself off that Richmond search a year and a half ago. Um, but yeah, just all of that stuff that goes into it, and again, his playing career. Again, he alluded to it today. He didn't go out there to make friends out in the playing field, and I think that'll be the way he coaches will be to instill a little bit of that in the team as well. Obviously,
Mhm.
this is getting a bit ahead to 2026, but and that's not to say that Ken doesn't inject a hard edge, but some of the critics might say that he doesn't go hard enough maybe with some of that stuff. And although you got critics that say that we shouldn't go so hard and that like the showdown rivalry stuff is you and I have got our thoughts on that. I think we'll probably talk about that when it gets to showdown week this week. I've got a lot of
Oh
thoughts
yeah.
about how people talk about our rivalry, but I think we need to get a bit more hard with it. And I think Carr's the perfect bloke to come in and both. He's a Port Adelaide player, a Port Adelaide kind of lifer in the sense of his being drafted there, and time a little bit of time away aside, he's basically most of his career has been with Port Adelaide, and that's going to be an important. I think that's a great. I like the internal. I guess getting to the idea of some of the stuff to get to wrapping up. Some of the stuff that's been criticised is the internal appointment stuff and all that, and again, the proof will only be in the evidence we get going forward and in the subsequent years. But whether you can critique it, you can not like it, you can not like it. I at least appreciate the club has an ethos to what they're doing. It's a very clear and concise plan. They say this is what we want to do. It's not like there's evidence that, like Port has had assistant coaches poached and gone away and have success. So if we do promote internally, what's wrong with that? And I get, and yeah, they even said like, in a few of those, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, but it was interesting when they talked about asking, did you think about going to the market? And Kosh and them go, we know the market. Like, we know what we want to do. We also know what's out there. Like, you guys know what's out there. Like, what do we not know? And I think Ken at one point just went, do you guys know what we do? Like at a football club? Like,
Yeah, yeah. He's like, you don't really know what goes on inside football clubs. And I was gonna say, just on a separate note, like I hope we get a bit more of that, considering it is his last season as head coach at Port Adelaide. Like, yeah, he may go on to other coaching jobs, but yeah, I hope we get a bit of like backhandedness
yeah.
from Ken because he's generally pretty diplomatic
He's very savvy. Yeah,
at times.
he knows
Yeah.
when to push and pull, and but yeah, being his last year, he might just be like, I can just push a little bit more.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, the topic that you brought up is yeah, are we happy with the succession plan versus waiting until the end of the year to for the services of other
Go to
potential
market.
candidates? And
Weird. I found go to market a weird. I don't know if I'd heard it that way before. It was just a weird verbiage to use.
sounds like something Sam Edmund would say,
Yeah, yeah.
who again I don't think knows that. much about what goes inside football clubs. And I say that cognizant to the fact that I don't either. That's part of the reason why and as I've explained many times on the show, I prefer to lean on the apologist side of things and listen to the people that are actually in the industry or have
Mm.
been in the industry first and foremost. Um, Succession plan, I'm comfortable with it. I'm sure that's no huge surprise, but I guess you have to look at the each aspect of a succession plan, because people are quick to make comparisons and quick to make comparisons to the negative. But I think you have to look at the aspects of those examples to gauge where we sit in that category.
Mm.
So obviously, yeah, things like Mick Molehouse and Nathan Buckley have been brought up. John Worsfold to Ben Rutten, although it may seem that Ben Rutten was maybe hung out to dry a little bit by that club, which is a bit of a rabble in itself. And again, so I guess you're talking about how's the club going off field? Us versus Essendon, I think we're in a better position, to be honest, and
Mm.
have been for a much more sustained period of time. So then you have the positives to level it out, like Paul Roos to John Longmire, Paul Roos to Simon Goodwin, and now John Longmire to Dean Cox. We don't know if that'll be a success yet, but what has been a success is how those programs were handed over. And I guess that's what makes me more comfortable with our example currently. And look, there's not much evidence. It's been a day, but it seems that everyone is on the same page, which is what you can all you can hope for. Um, Nathan Buckley ended up making a grand final, unfortunately lost by a kick. The negative aspect of it was, and this is similar to Hawthorn's recently, was the outgoing coach wasn't 100% on board with the decision.
Mm.
But Sam Mitchell doesn't seem to be doing a bad job now. And like I said, Nathan Buckley in that Collingwood example, he made a grand final with a good team, I will say, because they'd just lost a grand final when Mick Molehouse lost his, handed over the reins.
Yeah.
So to bring it back to Port Adelaide, like I'm comfortable with how it's handled in the way that Ken seems to be initiating the process while it would have been a whole club decision to get the ball rolling a couple of years ago, which they've mentioned. Ken's on board. They've found a candidate that they like and that is more than happy to do the job in Josh Carr. So Josh Carr being the right coach, that's an argument in itself as well. Go to market. I think people overestimate the pulling power that a club in Adelaide has to attracting the absolute best of the best in either whether it be player or coach. Like Koshy said, and like what Matt Richardson said, or CD, I should say, it's not like they don't know what's out there, and it's not like they haven't potentially tried with some of those other candidates. But any good business worth their weight um, has succession planning, and football
Mm.
is more of a business than it's ever been. And people on both sides of the fence, of whatever fence you're talking about, will agree with that. Like it's serious business, and every big business that I've been a part of has had succession planning. So I don't understand why football clubs shouldn't be any different. It's not to say that they have to have a succession plan where the proposed successor does take over. But a good business has to have that as part of their structure. It's in your best interest. And as it turns out, again, I'm not cynical that they've picked him because it's the cheap and easy option. Like Josh Carr has been sought after by other
Mm.
clubs, most notably Richmond recently. So, and you've mentioned two ex-assistant coaches under Ken Hinkley's tutelage, I guess you could say, or mentorship or leadership or in congregation with him. They've gone on to be senior coaches too. So uh, again, maybe they could have done more due diligence to play devil's advocate and gone to the market. But if you've got a good thing And if you believe it's a good thing, then there's not a lot to suggest otherwise because of what you said earlier. He's done it the right way. And a lot of people outside of the club, I listened to Dwayne's World yesterday, actually, and there was a lot of people calling up who have no affiliation to Port Adelaide, punters, obviously, commenting on the fact that Josh Carr seems to have done it the right way, but then he ticks all the other boxes of culture, passion, love, like everything that you would want in a coach to come into your club. He shows and has shown evidence of that throughout his assistant coaching career, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. I do find it interesting as well because we have this the one of those, and again, maybe we're giving too much credence to it because the online fan base is just a small part of the overall voice and culture that goes into Port Adelaide. But you do see a lot of people online that want Port to get back to Port Adelaide values and all that kind of stuff. Promoting from within and promoting a Port Adelaide lifer to talk of Josh Carr in that way is a Port Adelaide value. Ken Hinkley was the first person to come from outside of Port Adelaide, I think, since Foss Williams, basically. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
we've been promote from within for decades up until Ken, because obviously then it was like we brought in Primus because it was like even in the AFL it was Kale obviously and then Williams, uh, and then Primus for a short-lived time. Buddha Hocking was, in there for a brief period as an interim coach, but wasn't. So the
He
first
was an
scene,
interim. Yeah.
yeah, so the first senior coach of the Port Adelaide AFL side, or Port Adelaide top level side, whatever competition it was in, for decades and decades, to come from outside the Port Adelaide system was Ken Hinkley. So then we've been, some of the, critics of what Port Adelaide's doing, and again, there is valid criticism to in amongst it. I want to stress that I'm not completely beating down on people that just like to. It's just like again, there's always just too much. Like it's just everything becomes an example of the thing that they think is bad when it's actually just sometimes in the grey area sometimes. But Josh Carr from being promoted from within is actually like a very Port Adelaide thing to do. So it's just funny that some of the criticisms of like, oh, he's just come from he's part of the boys club and he's part of the machine that is Port Adelaide of the last 10 years. It's like no, the Port Adelaide's actually doing a thing, and Kosh saying this is what we believe in is kind of a modern interpretation of a Port Adelaide value that we've had for a long time. So again, if it doesn't work, then it's not going to be indicative of a bad decision again. It's just going to be like, well, Josh Carr wasn't the right guy. But I'm playing devil's advocate, touching wood, and everything I see, like, and yeah, the going to market thing, like, who are again, like, they say they wanted a young first time coach, which is actually what a lot of clubs do. Like, it's not just a Port Adelaide thing. A lot of clubs go out looking for the next, fly at Collingwood, brought results. A lot of clubs go out looking for, whether it be Sam Mitchell or Matty Nix or there's a lot of that's how coaching
Well, most of
generations
the
happen. They're
premiership,
all they're all
yeah,
yeah.
most of the premiership coaches in the last like 15 years were first-time coaches when they were first appointed to the clubs that winning premierships in. So
Yeah.
yeah, there is, yeah, like there's
It's a
evidence
normal
behind
thing.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's all about the support you give them. And often, if they're a decent coach, if the club is stable and supportive behind it, they're going to give them a shot at success. And that's what we hope with everything that's been built at Port Adelaide. That's what we're going to be able to give Josh Carr as well. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just find it interesting that yeah, it is. Yeah, Josh, and it is just that very extreme side of the fandom that just likes to criticize everything and has seen Josh Carr become a stooge of Hinkley, and rather than actually giving him the credit that he deserves of having his own, which we've talked about, his own coaching journey, um, that has got him to this point, and he's put a lot of professional development in, and again, he's got the Port Adelaide pedigree on his side as well. And I think probably some of the best, again, it's not to go over all those little fun bits, but he's got some of the best Port Adelaide pedigree you can have. He's a feisty, honestly, if you ask someone that played against him, and he alluded to it, they probably would have called him a fucking cunt on the field. Like that's the kind, and that's what I want. I want a guy that opposition would think of as a cunt, that's who I want leading, like as a player. I'd love that guy leading Port Adelaide because that means he's done something. If you're seen as nice and not causing any trouble on the field, then you're not doing enough. Like if you're hated as an opposition player, then and Josh Carr was famously chatty as fuck and obviously was copping right hooks from Jonathan Brown on grand final day. That's a guy that's got a little bit of something. Like, he's got that footy, he's got that mongrel in him, and if he can
Yeah.
distill that into all the stuff he's learned as a coach, and he seems very like he's very stoic, like he's got that good coaching kind of calmness now, and all those the things that happen with he's said even about the Ramsgate stuff, I would have handled it differently if I was a little bit older, but like, that's young. But he's got that experience as a young man, and then he's become like an adult and coaching and done all those things, all that professional development. If you can distill all that into being a coach of the Port Adelaide Footy Club that demands that kind of take no prisoners approach to as far as our historical culture goes, whilst also, being, there is that respect part of the creed and stuff like that. Like, if you left it all on field, but I think he's kind of that perfect player to distill all of that kind of historical stuff that we expect while also having that modern coaching development, as well
That's
as all that,
right.
as
Yeah.
well as that little bit of mongrel and cunt that he's got. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Like you
say,
said,
and I
a
say
lot
that
of
in the
these
most
things aren't uncommon.
Australian complimentive way I can say it when I say cunt. I'm saying like that's a good thing. Like, that's a
Oh
good thing to
yeah.
have. Yeah.
Yeah. A bit about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of what you said, or like you said, a lot of it isn't uncommon. But what has also been commented on, particularly this week, is that Port Adelaide Football Club do tend to do things their own way.
Hmm.
And Koshi was on Eddie Corn's podcast as well, and I think Eddie brought it up, and Koshi was just like, "Yeah, that's right. We do. We always have." And just bring it back to myself. It's part of the reason why I love this football club, right? Like
Hmm.
we're the ones that tend to take risks. We do things a little bit differently to others sometimes, and I love that. A lot of other clubs have tried to do it a boring, very run of the mill way, and they haven't gone anywhere. And I mean that comment there could get blown out of proportion. Um, just looking at Port Adelaide historically, like yeah, it's part of the reason why I love the football club. I'm sure it's elements of the way that the club does things is why a lot of people love the football club because why the fuck else? If you love the football club purely just because of its successful record, like I think like that's the definition of a fair weather or you sing when you're winning type
Hmm.
mentality. And I don't really care for that, to be honest. I love the club. The fact that our club is so successful is a byproduct of a lot of these other things around the football club, and the fact that we do tend to take risks and try and punch above our weight. All of these things go into it. Like that's why I love the football club. We're choosing to do this thing right now the way that we want to, and like you said, there seems to be an ethos about the way that we do things at the football club currently. The club is in the best position it has ever been in,
Hmm.
from a football club, a sports organization point of view. We're choosing to do it this way. I like it may not work. Like bringing John Long can absolutely like if you were lucky enough to convince John Longmire, who's on a great wicket for himself right now,
Hmm.
or Chris Scott for that, like that might not work either. Like it just where yeah,
Well, look
and
at,
that's
yeah,
why
Mick Malthouse to Carlton
everything
was a
wrapped
fucking
into one.
disaster. Like,
What was that? Who
I
was
said
that?
Mick Malthouse to Carlton was a fucking disaster. Like, it just doesn't like you can go out and go to market and get the guy that's won premierships for two different teams, and then he's going to come, and it may just not work for you because he's not a cultural fit. What our ethos is saying is like we already know he's a cultural fit, and we think he's got
Yeah,
like, and we have the in-house data and vision and knowledge of who he is, and we've seen all that for years now, and think that can do the job. I like that more than I like just going, Oh, that guy won a flag t like 10 years ago. He may have got smoked. Like, speaking of Longmire for a moment, I'm not discrediting Longmire's success at times, but if you've gone out and gotten him, like, if he doesn't work immediately, then everyone's going to go, oh, we should have known because he got smoked in two grand finals in the last 4 years.
Yeah,
Like, that would be
exactly.
the
You can just
reactionary
see it.
response. So,
Yeah.
like,
Uh-huh.
no one's, no, like, hindsight's 2020, but all we know is, like, Josh Carr, champion player, good coaching pedigree so far. Like, we know who he is, we know what he brings, we already know that he's got a relationship. Like, if that's the way that you can do it, and again, historically has been a way that Port Adelaide's done it quite well over the years. If you want Port Adelaide to be Port Adelaide and do all the cultural things that you expect them to do, then they're actually doing that, and like they're doing it quite well. He's a
Mm.
premiership
Yeah.
player. Yeah, there's a lot of things that he ticks the boxes of what Port Adelaide fans think they want. They just don't realize that he actually that's all those cultural things that they think they want. He actually does match up to all of that. So yeah.
That's exactly right. And all of this would have been taken into consideration. Like, yeah, people like Chris Davies and then Ken, like these people don't get respect in the industry for nothing. Like,
Mm,
they would have done their due diligence, and Koshi for that matter, and from a business point of view, which is predominantly his job. I know, like you said earlier, puts his foot in his mouth sometimes, trying to get a bit too involved in football operations. But like listening to that interview with Eddie Corns, like it affirmed to me like that, yeah,
he cares.
Koshi loves the club just as much as the rest of us. They're
Yeah.
like, again, the people who try to accuse him otherwise really, I can't see the forest from the trees, in my opinion.
Mm,
This is a guy that was asked to do one of the biggest jobs in football, and that was turn the Port Adelaide Football Club around from a business point of view, which
mm,
is his main role, and he's done that. They would have done their due diligence, is the point I was making,
mm.
and they feel that Josh Carr is the best man for the job, just like they felt like Ken Hinkley was the best man for the job. And he hasn't done a lot wrong in that regard, except for the obvious, which
Hmm.
everyone is aware of and accepts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I think it's too simplistic to say that they brought Josh Carr back because they knew that he loves Adelaide, he loves a football club. It's an easy transition to make. I don't believe that entirely. I think if you've got someone available who does tick some of those extra boxes, like being passionate about the football club, I think that's an amazing bonus.
Mm.
Um, but if it was just the quick and easy option, then someone like a Josh Carr wouldn't have been of interest to other football clubs, particularly a big or some big Victorian clubs.
Yeah, I mean, to have been, I mean, I don't have any, I don't know exactly where the Richmond thing got to or at all, but it seems fairly well reported that they're interested, and this is a team trying to replace uh, a
A fellow
premiership a
premiership
premiership teammate
teammate,
of Josh
yeah,
Carr's that
who
had
just stole another premiership teammate's job in Gold Coast. Yeah.
the 2004 premiership or grand final coaching tree for players on both sides of that, and it is incredible.
Yeah, it runs
Um,
deep.
yeah, but yeah, like they wouldn't. They're trying to replace a dynasty coach, and he's in consideration. So, for the fact that his resume was looked upon as positive from clubs that if you asked any Port fan, a few years ago, who do we want to be run like? You would have been like, oh, that team over there that said actually, and they're the example of the team that actually said they're going to win 3 in 10 years and actually do it. Um,
Yeah,
to bring up just one of the which I don't care. Like that was like it is sometimes you need to not say too much, but again, I like that Port put it out there. Hey, we
yeah.
failed.
Said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, we
We've
failed.
spoken about that.
Who cares? Like, fuck it. Like, I'd rather a club that, um, you know, put some goals out there rather than just says, oh,
It's mainly Crow supporters, particularly in Showdown week, and yeah, most weeks actually that bring it up anyway.
well, they
Like,
don't have much
and
history of their own to talk about, so they've got to use ours.
do I give a fuck about, yeah? Oh, your club aspired to do this. It's just,
Oh, it's nice to have
Okay.
goals, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Oh, you fucking idiot. You didn't do it. You're right. Yeah. Cool.
cool. We'll
I
try
guess
again.
there
We'll try
are
again next
like,
year. Yeah, like,
yeah, I guess there are a portion of Port Adelaide supporters who also use that for their own agendas. But yeah, I
yeah,
mean, we've spoken about it before, and for those new, welcome. Thanks for joining us. But yeah, um, I think we're both on the same page in saying that like having aspirations to do such a thing are fair enough,
yeah,
and noble endeavors. Announcing it in the fashion that they did is probably was the incorrect way to go. Not probably, it definitely was because yeah, we haven't done. We've come close in
mm.
a way, but we haven't done it. So yeah, now it looks bad.
We
But
did,
it's just
and we
something
did it
that'll
in the
be
social
lost.
media era too. Like when
It'll be
Brendan,
forgotten in the sands of time.
yeah,
Really, it'll be a fucking yeah. Who gives a shit? And hopefully it'll drift into the sands of time because we do end up becoming a successful team from a premiership point of view. But
yeah,
yeah,
you got me thinking about
yeah.
the end of Blade Runner when Rutger Hauer is just on the. I've watched attack ships on fire over the rings at Lego. It's like all of these moments. It's actually just. If you've seen Blade Runner,
Yeah, I've
yeah,
seen both of them.
it's both of them are great, but that end of the original Blade Runner is just one of the most beautiful bits of because it is so applicable to everything in life. Like these things that seem amazing in that moment, like an attack ship on fire over Orion or whatever. I don't know the exact quote, but like this thing that is so magnificent and important in that moment, such as saying we're going to win three premierships in
Sensation,
5 years.
sensational.
Yeah, we'll be lost like tears in the rain. It's just nothing matters in the ether. Like again, I was angry for half of today because of the Merseyside derby this morning, and then like at once I let that anger subside. It's just like, oof, I'm still going to be angry if the season doesn't go the way I want it. But at the end of the day, we've just got to. And in sports, the great thing about football is we get to move on to the next year, and as we are doing now, get to move on to the next coach. I hope again, and again, it is a weird thing to be talking about Ken in such a obituary way when we've got at least 23 games to go. Hopefully, a few more
Yeah, and
after
we'll
that.
probably revisit a lot of
We
these
will,
sentiments as the
yeah,
season draws to a close, whenever that
um,
may be. But
yeah,
yeah, it is a little bit, yeah, eulogical, if
yeah,
that's even a word.
yeah. um, Eulogistic? No, no, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's a guy he's got such a. It'll be interesting this because he's to start closing off. It's a guy that has an interesting record book because he's 60% win percentage at Port, or 60.2 I think is the exact win percentage at the moment with 274 wins. Sorry, 274 games with 165 wins and 109 losses. Hasn't got a draw in there, which is amazing, by the way. Like to have coached
Mm,
13 years at a club and not had a draw because we've had a few draws
mm.
in our history, which mostly.
Well, and the last draw that we had was the very game, the last game before Ken became coach.
Yeah, there you go. And we've had plenty. We've had plenty of close ones in that time as well. So,
Yes.
you'd almost think that we'd accidentally stumble our way into a draw. He's a two-time Coaches Association Coach of the Year, 2013, which is his first year. Which we won 13 games that year, which we'd won 8 in the 2 seasons previous. And then 2020, which was the COVID year that we kind of weren't expected to do anything with the minor premiership. I know it was COVID year, but it was still an achievement. But of course, married with that is the fact that he's the most games coached without appearing in a grand final, which again is where some of that the valid criticism comes from, not the nasty criticism, but the valid criticism comes from. Um, One that sticks out to me: 11 and 12 in showdowns. So hopefully we can at least equal that. If not, well, no, we need to. Yeah, no. Hopefully we can
Well, we'd
turn that.
have to better it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, if he does get that one draw this year, then he could tie it up. Um,
Yeah, or
you go,
we could have a terrible start first half of the year, but we win the first showdown, but he still gets moved on at the bye.
yeah.
Then he can finish even. But
There
I'm
is, there
hoping for
is,
the double. I'm hoping
yeah,
for the
yeah. If we
double.
can just end up 13-12 at the end of the year, that would be wonderful. Um, So yeah, it's a coaching record that kind of speaks to a lot of the reasons that us people that like to think about things empathetically and objectively, but with a bit, with obviously our passion for Port Adelaide, that look at it and go, there's a lot of good there, but there is, the grand final record. I mean, yeah, it is. He has been a successful coach, as I thought and I listened to three quarters of the Eddie Corns podcast. I couldn't get through the full thing. No, it was good. Just I actually was just in the middle of a few work jobs and had to get out of the car. Um, but between the press conference and the Eddie Corns podcast I listened to, Koshi used the same terminology twice in saying we haven't been a he said we've been a good club, not a
Great
great,
team.
yeah, great team, not a,
Yeah.
yeah, but it said like great clubs win premierships. We've been a good team. So it was interesting because I haven't heard him use that terminology. So I think that's something he's come into talking about this whole thing with he's come in with this plan to say, look, we're acknowledging that we haven't done the thing that we want to do. And so we're going to
Yeah.
not say that. And so even Koshi is actually saying, hey, he hasn't been, and this is the thing I've always said too. Ken's a good coach. It's and
Yeah.
even I know when the whole Treadray untenable thing happened, and people were and Treadray is someone I do not want to talk about any more than I have to at the moment because that guy's gone down the fucking rabbit hole. Um, but when that thing happened on the radio, in that thing, because everyone was criticizing Treadray for going after Ken, but actually, if you listen to the full interview, Treadray said he's a great coach. He's just not like he may not be the right coach, and he may not be a premiership coach anywhere. He might just be someone who's a very, very good assistant. And I've always thought, I've held this thought for a long time. I think he's a very, very good, maybe overqualified assistant coach. He may not be quite a good head coach, but then, the future we'll see what the future holds. There's the rumors about Tasmania and Ken, frankly, would probably be perfect for that job if they want a guy that can come in and develop a young team. But that's neither here nor there at the moment. But yeah, it's just like his record kind of speaks to a lot of that as well. I think it's just he's a very, very good coach, but the terminology from Koshi today is kind of I like that they are acknowledging that. I think some of those fans that are a bit too far down the I just want to hate everything might not notice that, but they should notice that there is actually some terminology that's coming from the club that is acknowledging that yeah, it hasn't gone the way we want to, but we should also recognize the record. Doesn't mean you can't criticize the fact that we haven't got there. And there is the whether you want to look at the 2021 prelim or the final against Geelong this year, those were diabolical events that do at the time got harsh criticism, and still when I look back at them, I get a little bit angry and go, "What the fuck happened?" And we just can never know what exactly happened. And I remember Boak pretty much in tears on the radio after that Woodhogs prelim. Like, yeah, there's you and I have been angry after games, but we don't doesn't mean we don't acknowledge that just yeah, it's sports. It's very premiership's very, very hard to win. Doesn't mean we
Hmm.
couldn't mistakes get made in those time like in those moments. Like, Ken would probably when he looks back on his career go, yeah, I didn't prepare right then and do all this stuff. But in while he's coach, he's got to also try to do his job and move forward as well. And I've respected the fact that he, under immense pressure and immense criticism at times and unfair targeting of him and his family, has continued to push forward and be quite respectful of the club as well. He's maintained a very, very heavy level of respect for fans that sometimes there's some fans out there that he could have gone after and he's refused to. He's even today he said 99% of people have been fantastic to me, and he didn't go
Yeah,
after the
exactly.
1%. He
Yeah.
just said he acknowledged it a little bit, but he didn't go after them. He didn't say 99% have been great, 1% have been assholes. He just said 99% have been great, and that's what I'm going to remember. And yeah, he's maintained a stoicism about all that stuff that, frankly, I don't know. Like I've always said, I don't know if I could be like a primary school or high school teacher. I've always said because my wife's always said, oh, if you go back and get your master's with history, like, do you want to teach? I was like, I don't know if I could teach anything level less than college because I don't want to teach someone that doesn't want to be there. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would go like if a kid was being a dickhead in my high school class, I might just call him a dickhead. So like which you can't do apparently. So Ken's stoicism in not in refusing to yeah, and not that those fans again, a lot of those fans are actually decent people by the way. Like they just don't. metabolize. Some of them are probably assholes. Some of them are in between, just don't metabolize their ideas quite right online. And but Ken's remained quite stoic about all that stuff, and I respect that quite highly. And I think that's when we get to the end of the year and get to the end of it properly, we'll probably, you know, maybe do a full on. Just we'll give a bit more respect. But I just wanted to like end on as we end it, just touch on that a little bit that he's handled himself quite well, I think, over the years. Yeah, and he's admitted to the mistakes in the moments with the James Sicily stuff or whatever. He's always said, he's human, and then not that he's the same as Jurgen Klopp, but Jurgen Klopp's often said, "Once I cross that white line, some at Liverpool, sometimes to the way I act, I don't know who that person is when I see it on replay, but it is just, But he
Yeah,
always
yeah.
he maintained that stoicism all the time and a self reflection that I respect, and Ken's always had that self reflection as well as understanding of the fact that while Adelaide is a very small town and the melting pot of it as far as its football media and football craziness, which is wonderful at times, and when it's nasty. But he's to do that for 13 years. I couldn't do what he's done for 13 years. Well, he's going into his 13th year, but if he gets through this year
Hmm.
and gets through 13 years, it's going to be pretty impressive in the context of the fact that um, he's done it under some pretty, you know, he had some good times at the start, but there's been some pretty nasty stuff over the years, and he's maintained a pretty good professionalism over the course of it.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Um, but he's also got he's got a bit of character about him, and what I was going to say, it's similar to what you mentioned about succession planning and all of that, about how we've typically done it the Port Adelaide way. Like Port Adelaide has always had kind of um, enthusiastic and or coaches with a bit of character about, a bit of something about them, a bit of emotion about them. Um, you know, Choco, Jack Cahill, and Foss Williams to another extent. I mean, Russell Ebert was a coach of the football club as well. They're all a character in their own right, and all show a bit of passion. Um, so, yeah, again, it's interesting that when people criticize that, but it's always been the case,
Yeah.
more or less. And yeah, he's displayed all those qualities while copying it, like you mentioned, and just playing a straight back to it at all times.
Hmm. Yeah. And again, it's not that some of the criticism wasn't warranted, but some of the, just the sign, whether it be the signs and the stickers on the sign down on Port Road and stuff like that. It's just, yeah, it's stuff that, yeah, it was you can a lesser man would have handled maybe a little quite poorly, and then he probably wouldn't have been in a job as long. And maybe some of the detractor Port fans would say, well, then maybe we needed him to be a dickhead earlier. But it's just like the fact he's maintained a level and handled his mental health pretty like because just the mental health aspect of trying to deal with that year on year and how he's recharged himself to try and go again.
Well, yeah,
Um,
he always keeps the players' motivation high
yeah.
after all of this and amongst while all of this is happening. So
Mhm.
it's just a credit to the type of person and type of leader that he is, that
Yeah.
he can play a straight back to it, block it all out, and just focus on the task at hand more often than not. It would seem,
Yeah.
based on
Yeah.
his
I mean,
record.
his record, yeah, double-digit wins at least every year. Again, that win percentage is quite healthy for to go 13 years, well, 12 years. Again, I keep saying 13 years because again, what we eulogizing the year that's
Yeah.
ahead of us still. But yeah, 60% win percentage over 12 years. Again, like I know someone that's gonna, well, if anyone's gotten through to this point, they're probably hopefully fans, but someone's gonna hear me say that again and go, oh, but it's just who cares about the minor round? It's just like, no, we're just trying to acknowledge the fact that he's done a good job in that time. It doesn't mean I'm as angry about finals performances as anyone, but I just
Well,
don't.
he's a good coach.
Yeah,
That's what we're
yeah,
saying.
that's what
He's
we're
a good
saying.
coach.
Yeah,
He's not a great coach. We've always
yeah,
said that.
yeah,
Good coaches have good home and away records.
yeah,
I don't know why people like to ignore the objectivity of it all.
yeah,
Good coaches have good records by and large in the minor round. That's yeah, like what do you
Yeah.
want people to say? Do you want me? Yeah, like yeah, it's just silly. Again, it's something that I just don't see. It's just not my perception on things.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, but we've never. He's a great person
Mm.
and a great leader by all accounts, but unfortunately, whether it's completely his fault or not, again, we don't know what happens inside football clubs. He's not a great coach. He's
Yeah.
a good coach to very good coach,
Mm.
um, based on more factors than just the win loss, which is good in its own right.
Yeah. Yeah. But whether it be, yeah, his connection to players and, I know Zach Butters has talked about like that first year or so that he had over here when this is public, not like it's been in articles. Like Zach Butters' sister was dealing with an addiction issue that came up, I think, as he moved over to Port. And Butters spoke freely about how Ken kind of became a father figure, which Ken joked about now he's going to be grandfather figure once he leaves. Um, but yeah, he's like that father figure thing comes from a very real place, and I think some fans don't acknowledge that kind of like when you're dealing with an issue like that with a young player and that's just moved away from home, having to handle that stuff back there, and that to have Ken as a coach handle that with him while actually Butters immediately became a fairly decent handy player in those early he's developing him as a player and a human at once, and that's a very very tough thing to do, especially like just without any. If it was just a player coming in from a Brady Bunch home, that would be tough enough to develop them as a young man as a player. But then you take into account an extra. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but an extracurricular family issue that not many families typically deal with. Um, that's I think just in a microcosm, just an example of kind of the stuff that we're talking about that Ken did. Again, that doesn't translate to final success. But what he's done for the club and what Koshi was stressing today as well was just like he's done a lot for the culture of the club. Now, the detractors out there will say, well, the culture's losing finals. Cool. You can have that opinion, but the fact is there's a lot of people at the club that respect and love what he's done for them as humans, and then in how that extrapolates out to how the club has kind of soaked that in is a good club culture. And that to me, yeah. Oh, excuse me. Okay, man, I know it. I'll try to edit that out if I remember it, but I may not remember it. So if you're listening to it, that's probably what happened. Yeah, it's just what that means to me is that he's done unfortunately, yeah, we didn't get the premiership success, but we've built a foundation that now that he's moving on, that Josh Carr can immediately come into a club that, hopefully, if
He's in a position of strength, which is
yeah,
what Kosh said, not a
yeah.
position of weakness.
Yeah, because a lot of succession plans happen in a lower ebb. And maybe there's a little bit of like, and again, we'll get into it next week when we talk about the preview. Maybe there's a minor transition period happening, but again, it's not the R word as Kosh was alluding to today, which I like how Kosh goes, we don't like the R word around here. We don't like rebuild. And I'm like, every time he says it, he says, we don't like the R word, and then he immediately says it. But I guess that's what he has to do because
Yeah,
people aren't going to understand what he means. And but yeah.
he's turned it into a phrase.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we may be in a transition period, but that's better than being in an R word period, and in a fairly good position of strength with some fairly, again, we'll get into the preview stuff next week. Whether what you rate the list at,
Yes,
it's not
yeah,
a terrible list anyway. And Josh Carr's coming in and
no,
being able to look at it and go, "There's some stuff here." And again, we don't know what's going to happen this year. We could have a year where some players break out and you know, we've had those years before where we things happen that we don't expect, but don't know.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we're coming to the end now, but I guess some of the critics would even say that some of the aspects you mentioned about Ken just then are reason why he potentially should have or could have been moved into like a football operations role
Yeah, yeah.
earlier, while still sticking around the club because yeah, sorry, a lot of people acknowledge that he's a good leader of men and young men, and the coaching aspect is what lets him down in a lot of their opinions.
Mm,
So I just want, before we finish, I just want to know if you think that there's a possibility that he will stick around in some sort of capacity
Hmm.
after this season's done.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to know what his professional goals are going forward because he's in his late 50s, which these days is pretty old for a coach. I know Fagan obviously is one of the senior like people, talk about Fagan and
Yeah, which
Fagan's had
seems
it.
ridiculous from a world sport point of view.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But football's so niche, like it constantly craves people that are fairly recently out of the game, like you
yeah.
mentioned before.
Yeah, yeah, living in the US and watching watching college like Nick Saban at Alabama or like Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, like they were just 20, 30-year coaches and that talked about reinventing themselves as coaches through the
Yeah.
generations of players and how they change, whether it be, through the 90s, so but it is, yeah, the AFL is so unique in that way. I think some of the sport, like, Premier League might be getting a bit, there were some old aging coaches there too, but um, yeah, I don't know because the Tasmania thing is what intrigues me, like because that just feels like the perfect fit for him to go in there. But then it depends if he wants to do that again. Like, does he want? I mean, there won't be the back because it'll be a new club. Like, fans down there are just going to be. I mean, I assume it's going to be interesting how the club build of that goes. Um, Looking forward to a Tassie away trip in a few years. Like, that's going to be a fun one, I reckon. But
Mhm.
that's person. But yeah. I would love him to stick around and develop. That's a problem though. It's like I think there's such a toxic thing in the middle there that if he does stick around, that fans aren't going to let go of that. Like if
Yeah.
if we have a bad few weeks, then it's going
It's
to
because
be
he's still
it's
there.
because he's
Yeah.
still there infecting the, as you said, it's
Yeah.
insidious. Like yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
so I think I mean I wouldn't be against it, but I think my other like just having that knowledge of how the fans will be and I think maybe it's just a clean break and I think Ken probably would benefit as a person just for his own health probably just benefit from a break from it for a bit and I think with the fact that he can have a break and then move into the Tassie club probably would be again the Tassie one is just like I just think that's what's building for him perfectly is like he finishes this year, gets a year off, and then I think Tassie comes in 2028, so that's a 2 year break, but like he can get in there and start with the club, the list build and everything
Yeah.
going into
Well,
2028 probably.
yeah. They got VFL
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
play in as well beforehand.
Yeah. So and then he does that for a few years, maybe gets to his mid 60s and then he either has immediate success, and I would love nothing. I mean, if as long as it's not against sport, but it would be so just weird sports thing if he got into Tassie and like led him to a premiership in like 3 or 4 years. Like just
Yeah.
yeah, has a good run there straight away. But probably he goes in there, develops them for a few years, and then they change coach once they've got a team that's yeah. I just think that's where it's building to. But he might just maybe he does just go into being goes the Choco route, just never takes a head coaching job again, but spends the next 15 years in kind of that role that Choco's become quite well respected for. Like Choco's had a longer career as like an assistant development guy than he had and he had a fairly long career as a Port Adelaide head coach, but he's had a longer career as
Mm.
as a well respected kind of guy in what he does, whether it be Richmond or Melbourne and whatever else that he's done. So yeah, there's a the kind of the world's Ken's oyster after this year. Like he's so respect as you touched on at one point this podcast, like somewhat talking about how people criticize him and his connections in the AFL, but what's benefit to him actually Ken as a person is that he is so well connected and well respected within the AFL world and he does have a very very good skill set. I mean, he's had a very good career as an assistant coach prior to coming to Port, so he's got that. He's going to have the head coaching experience and a wealth of experience and developmental experience and clear results and success with that, even if it hasn't brought the ultimate success, that he can and will have a lot of options available to him post Port Adelaide.
Hmm.
He will have no shortage of suitors. Maybe the head coaching ones, I don't know. Some clubs around the league might go, geez, do we want because that's the problem is like head coaching at any other club it might come through with they're gonna those fans are gonna have because Ken's become a meme for other teams unfortunately so um that might not but for a club that's coming in that's fresh like you know it would be like someone like Gold Coast which obviously was is an infamous connection to Port Adelaide with the 2017 thing but clubs that haven't had any great success so maybe
Yeah.
Gold Coast, but then they've got Dimmer, so they're probably locked into him for a few years. So I feel like it's Tassie or just a developmental thing somewhere.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and he's absolutely earned. I'm sure he'd probably enjoy like once he got into a role as a lower down the rung guy, but still quite well paid, and he'd relish the opportunity to just develop guys without actually having that kind of head coaching pressure. I think, yeah, and I think that's probably where his skill set is best suited. But he did. And again, this year is yet to bear, but he did get very close to getting there as a head coach too. So, we those heartbreaking close prelim final losses. I genuinely yeah, we'll wrap it up in a second, but I still think if we just kick that one last goal against Hawthorn in 2014, I think we fucking smoked Sydney in that final. So, um, yeah,
Yeah.
he got
Yeah.
very close. As much as he also did have some catastrophic prelim failures, he did have some that got very close as well. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
judging by what Koshi said today, like well, they say they haven't spoken about what Ken intends to do after that. I do have doubts over that comment, but he did say that if he was to provide an answer yes or no right now, if Ken would want to stay on in some capacity next year, I think he said no. So um but they've got a season to play out and they haven't actually had any of those discussions yet. So
mhm.
yeah, I guess I'd probably believe that, to be honest. If that's the little nugget that Koshi is going with right now, then but Koshi, just on a final point before we
Yeah,
finish, Koshi did say that they've got some exciting announcements to make this year in regards to the club off the field. So like I'm keen for that. That's just on a totally different tangent, but Koshi being in the media the last couple of days has mentioned that. So yeah, look, it's just going back to the original point I made. It's kind of added a layer of excitement, or it provides an opportunity to enjoy the year that's about to unfold in a different kind of way.
yeah. I guess that's a good way to close because I think you and I, when we were talking, I mean, we were on Eddie's podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think it's out yet, but I went on Craig's Yank on the Footy podcast a week ago. He recorded with him a week ago, and he's releasing it. Um, and I know I've gone into both podcasts with a trepidation about just I think it's an underlying subconscious annoyance about the storylines that are about to come again because we've just done this thing for year after year. And I know
Yeah.
there's going to be some stuff that there's going to be all this year. Like if we have a bad run of a couple of games or whatever, there's going to be fans going, just make the change now. But overall, I just have this sense of relief that we're now at a point that we know what the future holds. Like there's no, oh, are we going to sign another contract in August or whatever the fuck. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
there's a relief that and it's a relief for me as a fan. It's just a relief for Ken as a human being that he's come to an acceptance of where he's at. And then as a fan, yeah, like you said, there's a little bit of an excitement to it. Like, what can he do in his final year? Yeah, we don't expect we'll get to the preview stuff next week, but maybe we don't expect the ultimate success. But again, because there's that like last dance kind of stuff coming like officially to it now, like um
Yeah.
as Eddie mentioned on the podcast we were on, like there is that little bit of officialness to that last dance aspect of it that yeah, you go, oh well, maybe, and that was a great thing, and it's a great way to finish probably the podcast too. Like, how much did you love that? Like, Kosh brought up like players in contract years, like, and slaps Ken on the back of the, like, he's just like
Yes.
Ken starts chuckling and just like players in contract years maybe have their best year of their career. So what happens with a coach? And
Yeah.
he slaps Ken on the back, and Ken just laughs, and it's just like that's perfect.
Yeah.
Like that kind
Yeah.
of sums up, I
Blushes a
think.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never know. I guess, yeah, our expectation maybe isn't there, but um, the unknown, it's the great theory of sport is it's the one,
Sport,
it's
100%.
it's all unwritten.
You
So
never know.
Exactly, and we've seen many fairy tales in many sports over the years. Often it just goes the way you think, but occasionally, little twists and turns happen. Certainly, Las Vegas had its most profitable year ever because of the Super Bowl this year not going the way most people expected. So, yeah, like I think it was like I made like just oh god, there was some astronomical number that Las Vegas made on betting on the Super Bowl weekend because just no one expected it. I mean, some people expected it maybe, but just the way it happened, the spread and all that stuff. So yeah, hopefully that we can have a little bit of that unexpected success for us this year. And but either way, there's a finish line in sight for Ken, which for those that detract against Ken, it's good for them. It's good for us that just there's that been that little inner turmoil of just where the club's at because of that toxicity. That's because you and I we don't like that toxicity. So I think it's just fun but it's the excitement is just what can happen this year, and I think
Yes.
the organic nature of this changeover means that I think yeah, Josh can learn more from Ken this year with the fact they can have that open dialogue about it now. Like they mentioned, I'm still midfield coach. Josh says, he's head coach. Josh, he said, I'll send the hard questions to Ken, but they can like in between that, they can have the organic dialogue and really learn from each other. Like Ken can still learn, and Josh certainly will be learning a lot this year, and I'm excited to see it play out. Yeah, in my mind, it's a transition year, but it's a transition year that still has the carrot of maybe we can do something special. So, yeah, it's all unwritten,
Yeah.
and I'm excited for it.
As am I.
Yeah. Now, do you have anything more, or ready to wrap up since we're Jesus Christ, it's past 11. Um,
Look, we'll revert back over some of the topics that we've already discussed. We'll bring up more as the season progresses, I'm sure. You
yeah,
mentioned players in contract. That is a little topic to discuss throughout the year as well, or
yeah,
players out of
absolutely.
contract, I should say.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll touch on that as the season draws closer and once it unfolds.
hmm Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll be back. Yeah, we're recording this on Thursday, the 13th Feb, so this will drop Friday. Happy Valentine's Day. Here's a podcast, is what we're saying, basically. Um, yeah, but yeah, we'll be back. We're going to be recording Tuesday, all going well, and then that'll drop Wednesday, and that'll be more of an overall preview of the season. So we'll talk more about actually how we feel about how the season will be going, and maybe we can touch on a few of those other issues that are coming, and then obviously it'll just as the season goes, some of those player contract issues and all that will come up as we move on. But for now, I think it's good that we got this out of the way because as usual we went longer than we probably expected, but we got kind of that catharsis out of just that's why I wanted to do it is like I just wanted to talk about it because I'd had all these internal
Yeah.
thoughts rattling around my head, and it was just good to talk about the decision, and now that it's official, and get it all out the way. And then next week when we do our preview, we don't have to rattle over this stuff. We can just say, "Yep, Ken's leaving," then we can move on to actually the
That's
more
exactly
in
right. Yeah. Get
the
into the
old.
X's and O's of it all.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for jumping on with me, Jamie, tonight, and looking forward to
Not a problem.
2025 with you. Yeah, chatting all things sport as we get into the weekly routine again. So yeah, cheers. Calm the fucking pair.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to 2025.
Boom.